Hey everyone, Wags here from Eagle Dynamics. So last month I answered about 25 questions based on a larger set of questions that you guys asked last year. And in the comments for that video, we had a lot of really good follow-on questions. So what I wanted to do for this video is, rather than going back to that older set of questions, is answer the most pressing questions that you guys asked in the comments from the last video. So let's get started. So first, let's talk dynamic campaign. I know this is a very popular one. And I'm going to answer this in two main sections. The first is kind of where our thinking is right now on the overall system. And then the second half will be where we are right now and what the biggest challenges are. So like we talked about before, with the dynamic campaign, it's kind of all focused around the ATO, or the air tasking order. And within that, you have both the strategic AI, we also call the RTS AI, and then we have the tactical level AI, which we also call the DCS level AI, which a lot of you guys are familiar with right now. So again, based on the ATO from the strategic level, it will essentially create ATO taskings and packages based on the priority, either automatic or manual. That could be anywhere from close air support to attacking industry, offensive counter air, and so on. And based on the conditions of the battlefield, the strategic AI will basically create the ATO to allow your forces to advance and take objectives and destroy the resources of the enemy. But at the same time, also have the ability to do this manually in terms of directing where you want the strategic AI to focus on, both geographically at a very small detail. So if you really want to focus on a particular part of the campaign map, you could do so. But also what you can do is you can also manually select what type of missions you want the ATO to generate. Again, be it OCA or CAPS or what have you. So you can basically go down either of those routes of automatic, or if you really want to get your hands dirty, you could do it the manual way as well. So again, once we create our ATO, then we'll have the missions all laid out for you. And initially, of course, each mission will be assigned to the AI. But of course, if you have the aircraft that flight is composed of, then you can go ahead and take control of that flight, of course, and then fly that mission. So that's, again, pretty much the nuts and bolts of the mechanics of the ATO. So now let's talk a little bit more about kind of the details of the air, the ground, and also how we keep up good performance. So first, let's talk about air, which is probably the biggest component. The biggest of those is the logic of creating logical packages. So for example, if we are doing, say, an airfield takedown, of being able to properly set up the sweep flight, the seed flight, the strikers, and all in a logical way. Now tied to that are different elements. So for example, the ability for self-preservation of a flight. So they understand that if they're wildly outnumbered and it doesn't make sense to proceed at the target without taking in losses, that they have the wherewithal to understand the RTB. In a similar matter, if a pop-up threat happens, of better understanding of how to react to that threat, while ideally still being able to carry out the mission. That's also a big one. And probably the last big one we're working on with the air side is proper assignment of weapons to the different aircraft to best accomplish that mission. So that's kind of the big focuses we're working on right now for the air component. And as you might imagine, these AI elements are certainly not confined just to dynamic campaign. These will also certainly have big elements for just a general DCS aircraft AI as well. Now, with the ground element, I think we're actually going to be pretty unique and pretty cool with the level of detail and fidelity we're going to be doing with the ground phase. And a lot of the big work right now is still focused on the AI, both in manual and particularly in the automatic level of tasking, to understand the phases of combat, whether it's offensive, dug in defense, fighting with the trawl, or retreat. And then tied to that of the AI understanding kind of where they are on the map to best take advantage to roads versus having to go cross country. And further understanding kind of where the weights of power are on the map, be it an airfield or a large city, to best understand where they need to amass forces in order to defend those weights of power. On a more tactical level of the AI understanding of how to best use units in direct versus indirect fire. So those are kind of the big elements we're working on for the ground element right now. Now, another big element is the ability to create battles as small or as big as you want. So you can make a tiny battle or you can make something pretty epic. Now, if you're going to do something really huge, it's very important that if you're going to have a monstrous amount of units, you're going to want to have good performance, of course. So a big task we've been working on is the ability to aggregate and deaggregate units. So naturally, if you're actually taking part in the battle itself or watching it, you're going to have everything deaggregated. Whereas if you're away from it, it's another part of the map, then everything can be aggregated together and everything is based on an algorithm at that point. So again, it's something we're working right now. It's going to take a lot of testing, but it's a system that we believe should be able to allow a huge amount of units in a large dynamic campaign without a big performance hit. So two last items on dynamic campaign. First is that both sides will basically have industry that will be capable of producing different types of goods, whether it's a tank, an aircraft, ammunition, fuel. And from those production points, we'll actually be doing no-kidding logistics from those points to logistics centers, and then from those centers to smaller supply depots and so on. So in all of those will be actually rendered as vehicles within the map itself. So having interdiction missions will be a big part of the campaign, as you might imagine. The last part is most of the UI work right now is focused on the campaign builder aspect of it. We're getting close. We're starting to define the actual user interface. But before we can really pour the concrete on that, we need to finalize some of the functionality and capabilities within the dynamic campaign first to make sure that we have a UI that will best take advantage of it. So that's kind of where we are right now with dynamic campaign. I'm sure a lot of you are screaming right now, when? We're hoping by the end of this year. We're pressing really hard. I can't make any promises. That's my best estimate right now based on where we are right now. And we're doing our absolute very best. We understand that this is hugely important for you, probably the number one item that most DCS users want. Personally, it's my number one feature I want to see in DCS, as I have been for over a decade now. So trust me when I say it's not for lack of dedication, resources, and work. It's just a massive task, and it's just taken a lot of time. We certainly underestimated initially how long this would take, but we're getting there. We're making good progress. And again, we hope to have something we can show, at least for single player, by the end of this year. Okay, so the next question, and the answer to this will be a lot shorter than the first one, is why are you doing an F-35 and not a Super Hornet? So first, let me put to bed this notion that we're not doing it because it's too classified or we don't have the materials. We certainly can. That's not the issue, particularly for like a Lot 21 with the APG-73 radar versus a later lot with the EDSA radar. In fact, I already wrote up a full design spec for it years ago, so that's really not the issue. The biggest issue is that we really want to first complete the legacy Hornet to, almost 100%. So things like the MSI, some of the flight model issues and things like that, we want to square those away before we even start working on a Super Hornet, because I can already see the massive ranting on some particular dark corners of the internet of us starting to work on a new version of a Super Hornet when we haven't even finished the legacy Hornet. Further, even right now, the Legacy Hornet is still a very popular product for us. So I definitely think we will be doing a Super Hornet at some point. Again, an early lot with the APG-73 radar. Just right now, it's not quite the time yet, but it'll come. The next question we saw a lot was, where's the Hellcat and what's the status of the supporting PTO theater? So with the Hellcat, the external model, the cockpit, the pilot, and all the animations are pretty much done. Right now, the flight model is still being worked on, as well as the mechanical systems. Those are all making good progress. The big item still to work on is going to be the damage model. But again, right now, we're still looking pretty good for later this year. The other half of that pertaining to the PTO in general, which will include, of course, the free Mariana's 1944 map, and the assets we talked about in a previous newsletter, actually one I think for like a week or two ago, and the one we did just this week. So I'm going to ask you to take a look at that. But that's kind of where we are right now with the Pacific Theater. Of course, there's also work being done by third parties like Magnitude 3 with their Corsair. But as our policy, we really don't try to speak for third parties. We'll let them speak for themselves. But from everything I've seen on the Corsair, it's looking really fantastic. Now, another question we got a lot was, what are you doing to improve VR, particularly in terms of performance? So we haven't really been targeting a specific VR performance. Rather, what we've been doing for a while now, which you can really see with the addition of multi-core more recently, is trying to increase DCS performance in general. So, as the saying goes, rising tides raise all ships, the ship being VR in this case. And I think most of you, not all, but most of you have seen an appreciable increase in VR performance because of that. Of course, we're looking at other things still to improve VR. Spotting dots is a big one, which I think we've made strides, but there's certainly still work to do. But the big one on that one is what we found is it really also depends on the VR device. Not all VR devices are created equal. So one of the things we're trying to do is have a broader range of VR devices at our disposal to test. So that way, when we do make changes to VR, like spotting dots, we can accommodate as many possible VR users as possible. Next is the question of what are you going to do about improving combined arms? So combined arms is actually a really interesting product in terms of its development cycle, in that it was initially created actually for a professional customer for JTAC training. But then there was the requirement added for the ability to move a JTAC unit around the map. And then later, the ability to control different vehicles for sites. So as we started to add more and more features to this product, it started to become essentially a module game within itself. And that was kind of the genesis of combined arms. So it really wasn't built from the ground up as a more traditional game module. It was more built as a tech demo in many ways to support JTAC control. Now that being said, we certainly do want to do like a combined arms 2 at some point, which would much more bring it in line to a more game type product, particularly with the interface, adding VR, and things like that. It's just the age-old question of where the time and resources will come from. And right now, they're simply not there. It's certainly something we do want to do because, believe it or not, combined arms has actually been quite a successful product for us. So I think there's definitely a market for us, particularly a much improved one. So again, kind of like we were talking about before with the Super Hornet, it's the age-old question of it's not of a question of if, it's more of a when. But again, also hopefully sooner rather than later. So next question, which is certainly not a lightning rod, is why are you doing the F-35? So when it comes to references, ideally, of course, and traditionally, it's done through flight manuals, but those are not always available. Even for some of the other DCS aircraft we do, they were not available. We had to find other sources. And in this case, the F-35 is a class example of that, where after 2 years of research, much of it done by myself, there was a wealth, actually to me shocking level of information out there outside of manuals. Now, that's not to say we're going to do 100% accurate F-35 simulation. Of course not. Nor is any aircraft in DCS close to 100%. That's not the goal, nor are we trying to do like a 2025 F-35. Instead, what we'll be doing is a F-35 circa, I don't know, anywhere between 2012, 2015 time period, a bit, again, based on what we've been able to find over 2 years of research of a ton of data that we strongly believe we can have a very strong and good representation of the primary missions and operations of this aircraft. So we have every confidence it's going to be a great product. We understand that some will not agree. Some don't like the F-35. Some will still not believe there's a proper level of information available. But in the end, it really comes down to the final product. So all we can ask at this point is, hold fire for a while until you've actually had a chance to fly it or read some reviews, and see for yourself and judge then. I think, and I strongly believe, you'll be surprised at what we can put together based on what we've been able to uncover. Now, the next and closely related question to the previous one is, well, if you can do an F-35 based on guesswork, why don't you do like a current day Russian fighter, like a Su-35 or even a Su-57? Well, it goes back to what I was saying before, that there is a surprising amount of information available for the F-35 to create it, whereas with those other aircraft, there simply aren't. I talked about earlier with the Super Hornet. Yeah, we can do a Super Hornet, but it's going to have to be based on a very early lot. There's just not nearly enough information to do it on a later lot using the EDSA radar. So it kind of comes back to, I think, just a misperception about how much information is available to do an F-35 compared to, say, the amount of information out there to do other modern aircraft. So in the chat from the previous video, we had a lot of when are you going to do X aircraft? But probably the most common one, at least I saw, was when are you going to do a Blackhawk? So really want to do a Blackhawk, no doubt about it. Unfortunately, right now, as you might imagine, our helicopter teams, 2 of them, are really tied up between the UH-60D and the Chinook, and there's another helicopter we've been working on too. So right now, we just don't have the time and resources, as you might imagine. The good news is, if and when we do, there's lots of good reference information for the Lima out there. Unfortunately, not so much for the mic with the glass cockpit, which I'd love to do. So if we had to do a Blackhawk tomorrow, it'd probably be the Lima. But hopefully between now and when we do have the time and resources to do a Blackhawk, there'll be some good public references for the mic at that point. So the next common question we have is when you're going to do an updated Su-25T. So as you know, we announced recently, we're doing a free Su-25. So right now, that's where our resources are voted. I think at some point we'll certainly do the 25T. It's just going to be a bit later on, but I think it's something we'll certainly do at some point. Again, just right now we're focused on the free Su-25. Next, a common question was, when are you going to have a better replay system? So I know some of you know this, but a quick background on the replay system. We call it the track file system, in that it was originally created actually as a debug system. And all it really does, it's actually quite simple, that you load in the mission file, and based on the track file, it has all the different inputs that were recorded when the track file is recorded. So it's basically just playing the mission file and then inputting those inputs from the track file, which is great for short debugs, but for large scale missions, thing with randomizations, issues between different versions. So if one version the AI does A and a different version the AI does B, well, of course it's going to break the track file at that point. So it's definitely limited, but it was basically used as a debug tool. Now, it's not to say we're not going to do a new one, but the thing is, it would pretty much have to be a new system from the ground up, based on the structure of how it works. There's just no way, it's impossible to do, say, like rewind. So we'd have to create a whole new system. So it is something we're researching. It certainly won't be something for this year, but it's something we want to do and are actively at least researching the technology of how we do it. Okay, so the last question for today, and a common one, not just in the discussion, but throughout our social media, is when are you going to, put in some additional Russian or Eastern fighters in DCS? So obviously, right now we're working on the MiG-29 for later this year. In addition to that, we're doing the Flaming Cliffs level Su-25 for free. So right now, those are our two big focuses for fixed-wing aircraft for DCS. To do other aircraft, even more modern ones, say like an Su-25 SMT or an Su-35, again, it kind of comes back to us talking about before about references. Again, not to repeat myself, with the F-35, yeah, they're not manuals, but we still have a ton of other references to model relatively close to what we need to. With some of these other Russian fighters, those references to that level of what we have for the F-35 it simply doesn't exist at this point. And it's not to say it may not later. It's always possible. I doubt it, but it's possible. But for now, our current focuses, again, are on the 29A as well as the 25. So that's it for this video. I hope you found it informative. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.